Welcome to the Drive-By Entrepreneur Podcast, which exists to bring current and compelling content to entrepreneurs and influencers of small to mid-sized organizations. I'm John Frank, fellow entrepreneur and the owner of Third Road Management. And with this podcast, we will connect with a variety of experienced and dynamic individuals to shed some light on both the art and science of entrepreneurship. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors. First, my very own Third Road Management, a company that brings fractional CFO services to small and mid-sized organizations by revolutionizing the CFO suite. We'd also like to thank Two Hound Red, a brewery and restaurant located in Glen Ellen, Illinois, that is focused on creating classic, innovative beer and food. And finally, we'd like to thank NWC Media, which provides inbound marketing technology, project workflow management, and efficiency consulting to organizations of varied sizes, who is also the producer of the Drive-By Entrepreneur podcast. Tim Swindle, welcome to the Drive-By Entrepreneur podcast. Great to have you here. This is exciting.
Awesome to be here. Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, you bet. New format for us, by the way. So if there's any kinks in the process, we'll work through them. But usually we film on site at a restaurant that's gracious enough to hold us on their day that they're closed. But since you're in Nashville and you got such an incredible story, wanted to test out a new format. So excited to have you here. I usually start out just by explaining what the podcast is, who it's for. But our mission statement is that we exist to bring current and compelling content to entrepreneurs and influencers of small to mid-sized organizations. So everybody that's been on here before, as well as those that will be here in the future, are entrepreneurs themselves or people that sort of intersect with entrepreneurs that have like interesting things to say, right, about, whatever their subject matter expertise is. So, with you in particular, I know that you've been a serial entrepreneur. And I think a lot of your story is going to resonate with a lot of folks. So excited to dive in. So I'm going to tee it up for you to introduce yourself, but just wanted to kind of put out there that you're co-founder of Glacier Games. But in addition to that, and I know I mentioned a little bit earlier when we were just kind of catching up that, I've been following you from a distance, since our days in Champaign, through LinkedIn and other social media outlets, and I've seen your journey and cheering you on, right, from a distance. And
Thank you.
Yeah, and that U of I network, as you mentioned, is very thick and very supportive of one another. But why don't you introduce yourself? I'd love if you can maybe provide me with an update of like what you're doing now, but also like your journey to get here, right? Because it hasn't been one thing that you've been doing the whole time, and I'm excited to unpack that a little bit.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. So as you mentioned, currently the co-founder of a game publishing company called Glacier Games, which is I'm partnered with a gentleman by the name of Scott Brown, who I met as we get into the story through one of my prior ventures into the game space. And we most recently launched a game called PaddleSmash, which is a kind of a cross between pickleball and spike ball. And so we launched that just about 9 months ago. And so that's kind of my main focus right now. But as you mentioned, kind of a serial entrepreneur, always have mostly dumb ideas that I'm trying to bring to light. And so have my hands in quite a few things, but the game space is kind of my main thing right now.
Very good. Very good. Well, one of the things that I thought of when I was just thinking about, watching your journey along the way, right, has been, this phrase, and I'm sure you've heard it if you haven't heard it. But the phrase says, we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing, right? And this whole idea of having fun, right? And right. I feel like every time I've seen you, on these social media outlets and things like that, I'm like, man, he's just having such a good time doing what he's doing. Like you're genuinely having fun. So the thoughts that came to my mind are like, what is it about games that you enjoy so much. But then bigger, you know, sort of more philosophical question would be, you know, why do you think it's important for people to love what they do as their profession?
Yeah. Well, I love that you just said that, because that is truly what I try to live by myself, is that I try to focus on fun, and I want to bring fun things to life. And as I don't know if it sounds cheesy or not, but that is honestly my goal. And I can give a little bit of a backstory of how I got to that point of wanting to focus on fun and being fun and having fun. So was a software entrepreneur. Actually had partnered up with some other guys that went to U of I to build a software company. And this was a venture-backed software company, burning a ton of cash, running big teams. And it was a grind, and it wasn't very fun, quite frankly. And as like a side hustle, decided to launch a card game with another U of I guy, Dave Mazurek.
Yep.
And that came to be because we had read an article in Inc. magazine, and they laid out how Cards Against Humanity had brought their game to life, which was another Chicago-based company. Some guys that went to Highland Park High School together. And they kind of put the blueprint together of what they did to launch Cards Against Humanity. And Dave and I sat there and we were like, you know what? There's a game we've been playing for years now. This was kind of 10 years post-college, going up to lake houses late at night. You're kind of like, I don't know, just trying to figure something to do. And there's this game that we had created where you're writing on pieces of paper, different funny voices, like accents you could talk in. And then on another piece of paper, you would write some sort of funny phrase. People will pull from both piles, and you'd go around and say these funny phrases in these accents. And it was just a silly game, but it was a ton of fun. And unbeknownst to us, we had essentially been play testing for the past 10 years and market testing it and all these things that I now know are actual processes you should go through when bringing something to light, to bring a brand new product to light. And we said, let's kind of take the playbook of Cards Against Humanity and see if we can't do that. So we did. So both of us, again, having full-time jobs, him in real estate, me with the software company, decided to just do kind of like a nights and weekends side hustle. And we did that, and did a little Kickstarter. Didn't blow up by any means. You see some of these that just kind of go bananas on Kickstarter, but ours just kind of barely got funded. And but it was our first win, and that was enough to just get the ball rolling. And that led to an introduction to my now business partner. So that kind of brings us full circle to meeting Scott. Scott was the co-founder of a company called Marbles the Brain Store, which had started in Chicago. And they were kind of a toy and game, but health, like they had like a focus on brain health, which looking back on it, I don't know how my game really helped with brain health. But anyway, they had like built a nice little brand for themselves. I think they had about 30 locations at the time. And he decided to carry our game that we had just launched on Kickstarter. So, and that game was called Utter Nonsense, by the way. And so anyway, so now we launched on Kickstarter, got funded. Scott's taking us into his stores. It just got it going, and now we have a story to tell. And so, we had no employees at the time, but my sister, who was kind of an out of work single mother, asked her to help us with some PR stuff. She then reached out to some different people that cover toys and games, happened to get an article in Toy and Game News UK, United Kingdom. Our game not sold in United Kingdom. So I was like, great, Shannon, like good one. But guess who does read Toy and Game News UK? The Target buyer. So he read this little write-up in that Toy and Game News UK that was like an industry specific publication that I kind of thought like, whatever, who's going to read that? But it told the kind of the story, how we got funded on Kickstarter. We were kind of this adult game in that genre of Cards Against Humanity, which was just like exploding in popularity. And then Marbles had picked us up, which was, again, they were small, but they kind of punched above their weight class in terms of like, just, they had really good brand and had, it was respected for kind of finding new and cool things.
Yep.
So sorry that I'm talking a lot here, but
No?
that's kind of the path of how that got going. So out of nowhere, we launched basically like I think we had games, sorry, like on October of 2014. By the spring, we were nationwide in all 1,750 Target stores
Yeah.
the next March. So within 6 months of launching, we were national at Target, at the biggest retailer. So
I didn't realize that it was that close of a window. I mean, I just, you mentioned Dave, and I remember sending him a message around that time, like, awesome, man, just picked up a game in Target, proud of you guys or whatever. And I didn't realize it was that tight of a window though.
it was wild. And because it was so tight. So again, going back to, we were trying to use the playbook of Cards Against Humanity, which had shunned retail.
Mm.
That's what we were going to do. We were just following them. And we realized very quickly that by Cards shunning retail, they had created this void for these adult party games, right? So everyone's going into these stores wanting to play an adult party game. And they specifically wanted to play Cards Against Humanity. Nobody could offer it. They would not sell to anyone. So that was kind of our opportunity. We were like, oh, like we're filling that void that Cards Against Humanity's created. So we decided to embrace that. And that's kind of how we, got going. So we told them no. So we told them no, because we were scared. We had heard all these, going into a retailer that size, you hear how, they can bury you just as easily as they can make you. So product goes in, doesn't sell. Sorry, guys, take off the shelves. You have to pay for markdowns. There's all these terms in retail that you basically have to wear it if the product doesn't sell. So we said no. Well, again, in hindsight, the best negotiating tactic I've ever learned till this day is you tell somebody they want something, no, and you keep telling them no, like they're just the deal's gonna get better. So the target buyer, who is used to the biggest toy game companies in the world, like Mattel, Hasbro, Spin Master, they're begging this buyer to take their games in. And here are these two idiots from Chicago being like, no, we're good. Thanks though. Maybe next time. And so I think he was so thrown off by what we were doing, which was pure ignorance. We had no clue what we were doing. We were just like, no, we're not going to do this. So to his credit, Mark was the buyer's name, who's now become a good friend. He just kept sweetening the pot. And so I think we told him no like 9 times. It was crazy. So he'd be like, all right, you're worried about that. Well, we'll give you this much marketing budget to help, raise the awareness of the game. We'll give you premier shelf space. We'll give you end caps. These are terms also, like we had no clue what these terms were. So we're on these calls with the buyer and he's like, we'll give you end caps. Well, I don't know what end cap is. So I'm Googling what is an end cap? Turns out, brands pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for these spaces to be specifically located on shelves, eye level, right? Like these are all things that you want to have if you're going to be on a shelf. You want like the premier locations, etc. They were doing these little pedestal things that actually stuck out of the shelf, gave us like, it was crazy. So finally it got to be like, well, this is too good to be true type of thing. We're just being idiots by saying no. And they waived all those clauses of markdown clauses. They had no clawbacks. They helped us with financing. I'm like telling this story still like just blows my mind.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we went in and it crushed. Like we crushed it with them. We launched another version, like a family edition. And just to kind of fast forward a little bit, I kind of basically bought out Dave, basically was running the company by myself, got approached by like a bigger toy and game company that was private equity backed. And just said, now's probably a good time to exit this thing and ultimately sold that at the end of 2017, I think.
Okay.
So
okay.
that was that story.
What a ride. That's that's something. I mean, and if you always enjoyed just games, like it is, like you said, you guys kind of spontaneously had made it up beforehand. Is it part of your family or like
Yeah,
what's
sorry, that was your initial question. I just totally verbal diarrhea there.
no, yeah, it's all good.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, and this kind of all is led to the current day of where, so going back to the software company just for a second. So this was very different business model, venture backed, super high stress, managing a lot of people, and then just kind of had this fun passion project, just kind of pursued something that I thought was like intellectually interesting and fun. And I thought, if I'm having fun, if I have fun with this and I'm a market of one, what are the chances that other people are going to enjoy it as well?
Right.
And when that became successful, one, I fell in love with the business model. Part of that story was like, ended up after we sold our software company to LinkedIn. I ended up traveling on the other half of the world with my then girlfriend, now wife, for 6 months out of the year, could kind of run this from wherever. And I was like, this is what I want to do with my life, like not managing tons of people, bootstrapped, kind of run it from wherever, not tied to any one location. So decided, and then most importantly though, was like, I'm bringing fun to the world. Like when I started to see the responses from people, you start getting reviews, you start getting people reaching out to you, being like, I've never seen, we played your game and I've never seen my grandma laugh harder. Like, I mean, that stuff like hits you and you're like, wow, I'm not just like sitting here. This isn't just a job. Like that means something. And it was like a realization that when I stopped thinking about money being my main motivator and I started thinking about like what just is going to provide me the most like intrinsic value of just what am I going to want to wake up in the morning and feel good about? It's oddly enough, the money followed because it was like my intentions were, I'll say pure in reasons that I was pursuing it. And at least I think that that's played into it a little bit. And so from then on, I've just kind of taken that same approach where I've said like, listen, I'm not going to pursue something because I think I can get rich off it. I'm going to pursue something because I find it interesting. I think it's going to be fun for me, even if it's not successful. Like that part's critical because it's really hard to make something successful. And I would hate to bang my head against the wall for however long and it not be successful and then also not be very fun. And so if I'm having fun with it and I'm feeling like I'm bringing something fun to the world, then that's a main motivator for me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we were chatting, before we hit the record button, just about, you were asking me candidly, why are you doing this? And I was like, I'm an entrepreneurship nerd. I love it. I love hearing people's stories. I love hearing the background of like, how did that happen? Or why did that happen? Or like, you talking about negotiating with this Target guy and, like you weren't even negotiating. You didn't know you were negotiating and him just like giving you all these terms that, you probably shouldn't have gotten. Like, I love those stories. And I think there's so many good stories out there that people are doing super interesting things. And I love that stuff. You know what I mean? So is this podcast, my next, breadwinner for the family? Like, no, I just enjoy doing it. And, I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time catching up with you. It's been a long time. You know what I mean?
More often than not, if you're doing something that you enjoy, I think then doesn't feel like work, and then I think other people can like sense that too. Like the people that are listening to this podcast, they can tell if something's forced or not, or if it feels authentic and organic. And I think that ultimately leads to success personally. So
Absolutely.
wish you all the best.
You've talked about a couple of these different businesses. The second topic I was going to hit on was just around like startup to exit, right? And I was curious because I really don't know the stories of each of the businesses, but you mentioned software business, the card business, and then I'm not sure if you've exited anything else or the game business. But a lot of people like had this idea of I want to start something and then one day I'll sell it, right?
Mhm.
But they're like, I have no idea what happens in between start and sale. And I was curious if your experiences with those different businesses were similar and from like a fundraising and then ultimate exit perspective, similar in like how you funded it, what the, you know, operational pieces were, in between. And then, the sale process, were they both like auction type scenarios or were they both like totally different? And I'm just kind of curious to learn a little bit more about what your experience was with starting different things, funding different things in different ways, and then ultimately exiting them.
Yeah. So the going back to the software company for a second. So I always kind of had the entrepreneurial itch going back to when I was like 13. I taught golf lessons up at our lake house up in New Buffalo, Michigan, at our little 9-hole dog track in Grand Beach. And I had no right teaching anybody golf at that age, much less now. But I made business cards and put them up in the little clubhouse and ended up like teaching little kids basically how to play golf. And then I remember that so vividly and loving kind of owning my own destiny and just eating what I kill kind of thing. And like, I was out there, I was doing it. I was being responsible and I was making money for something that I was doing. So I always had that itch. After college, I was a trader for a while. That was entrepreneurial in a sense that like, it was just same thing, like you eat what you kill. And then I got into commercial real estate, worked for kind of a mentor of mine who had built a really successful, large commercial real estate and construction company, but just wasn't happy. It was just not what I wanted to do with my life. And there was, like I mentioned, these guys that went to U of I, they were getting going on a software company. And I invested a little money with them and ultimately turned 30. And I was like, if I don't do this now, like I'll never do it. And didn't have the gumption to just go out totally on my own. But approached those guys and was like, hey, like, what if we teamed up and, do this together? So did that. At the time, they were kind of like this data room solution. So if you're doing a deal, we were working with like banks and financial institutions, a lot of like alternative asset managers who do deals and need to have all of their documents into a deal room.
Yeah, I used to use intro links,
Okay, yeah, exactly. And so we did that, and for a few years, we just kind of plateaued. So we built up decent revenue, but it had not really hit, any sort of like parabolic exit velocity. And in that one, we had raised quite a bit of capital for, but we saw something interesting with the way people were using it was almost more of like in the sales function than it was purely deal transactional. It was kind of the way that we had kind of put a brand wrapper around their content and provide some analytics on the back end to know what the people were looking at from in that deal room. So we pivoted the company and we created a new solution from the ground up that was basically a sales software where you're in a sales role, you're sending a lot of content to your clients in different formats. You're sending PDFs and Word docs and links to things and videos. And that's typically just kind of like scrambled into an email with a bunch of links and attachments at the bottom. Whereas this, in our case, you upload that into our software, we make it look really slick as like a branded presentation of your content. That goes off to the customer, it looks much more professional. Then you also are getting analytics back to understand how are they engaging with that content? What are they looking at? When are they looking at it? So you can determine your follow-up accordingly. So with that, we did kind of like feel like we hit on something. We landed LinkedIn as a big client pretty early on. And at that point, we were in about 5 years into it. And it was going well, but we were also tired. And we realized one of the things that we did, just kind of just going back to answer your question, is we started to identify certain players we thought could acquire us. And we started to kind of develop the product roadmap in ways that might get their attention. So not abandoning our core mission, but also like when you're, with the product roadmap, like you could go any one of 500 different directions. And we just started to kind of see maybe there were some ways we could play nice with a few people that may be interested in acquiring us. So with LinkedIn, they were already a client. Their salespeople were seeing a lot of success with the product. We started to just kind of like put the tickle in their ear about like, hey, like this is something we could see fitting into Sales Navigator. That eventually made its way up to the corporate dev team. And then ultimately they approached us to, acquire us. At that point, we had like 25 employees. We had raised, venture capital, quite a bit of like angel capital too. So a lot of our friends and family had money in it. I had also started the card company at the time, which was taking off, quite frankly. And I was like, I think now's a good time for us to exit. And so we did. So LinkedIn ended up acquiring us. Most everyone went over there. I did for a short period of time, but ended up moving on and focusing on the board game company full time.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sorry. With the compare and contrast with the board game company, obviously you went to a strategic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But was that an auction process too, or how did you think about that one?
Yeah. So again, very different business model, low tech, no employees, everything was outsourced, bootstrapped, no investors. So night and day from the software company, one of which I much more preferred. One from an equity side of things, owned almost, Dave did too, but ended up buying him out. And so different equity position with that, and just it's different when you don't have investors. I don't know, like if being an entrepreneur, a big reason why you're doing that is to kind of work for yourself. But then you're always having to answer to investors. It takes a little bit of the fun out of it. And so, yeah, I just like that idea of just like, it's just me basically. My sister worked for me at the time, and then otherwise worked with a series of agencies to do things. But so to answer your question about the exit and the sale. So yeah, did not do any sort of like hiring a bank and doing an official process like that. It's a pretty small world where you get to know the players pretty quickly in terms of who would be a potential acquirer. I was also like, call it more of a product than a company, right? And so if we had, I don't know, 30 different SKUs, all different types of games and genres and things like that, maybe we would have been more of a company, which you would maybe look at like traditional private equity, be more a potential acquirer. This was limited in the sense that like anyone that's going to buy us is going to be another toy and game company. So then you start looking at the landscape of, well, who is that? And what is our type of game? Our game was very like US centric. And so the Mattels and the Hasbros of the world, they're going to want to buy like a widget that they can make 1 million times and put it into their international distribution system and sell the same thing, make it the same way and sell it all over the world. Our game was like US humor, very US centric. So there's like a tier below them of, basically below those publicly traded companies of still big, but US focused companies. Did some outreach to them, got actually got some inbound, like once we had 2 games on shelves at Target, we were Barnes and Noble, we were starting to talk to Walmart. Those guys, they know what's going on, and they see some little schmo taking up that kind of shelf space that's very valuable to them. They know who you are, and they're interested in chatting. So talked to a few of them, and ultimately went down the path with a company called Play Monster based in Wisconsin, not too far from Lake Geneva. And they just made a really strong offer. And I think I can't share like the exact dollar amount, but it sold, traded for about like 8 times EBITDA. So it felt like that was like a healthy sale point for me, and just knowing what the market was trading at the time. And so just said, I think this is a good time to exit.
Yeah, and I'm kind of circling back on our original discussion there, but I was kind of curious about when you were talking about the concessions that were originally made when you were going on the shelf at Target first. I'm like, just wondering if the exclusivity was one of those things that was like, okay,
It was. That's a good question. Yeah. So if they're going to open up their Komodo like that, they don't want to see it anywhere else. They were fine with, I mean, I mentioned marbles, like that's not considered, they don't consider that competition. It's really Walmart. Barnes and Noble, I think was, no to start with. Amazon was like, okay, it's I think today they might say no to Amazon. Amazon was not quite yet like the big competitor in the toy and game space for them. I think today that'd probably be different. Now that they put so much into their kind of e-com side of things, Target has. And so, so exclusivity, it was a thing.
And just to hit on operations there, because you mentioned it with the differences between the two companies, one being, a company where you were, the owner, and you mentioned, not really having teams of people and things like that. You mentioned outsourcing. So you were able to fully outsource the production of the game, distribution, all the logistics to get it in the stores and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So when that conversation happened with Target, we were like, well, how do we do this? And they kind of put us in touch with preferred distributors. We had already had the manufacturer. We decided to stick US based. There's a comfort level with, it was a company based in like near Battle Creek, Michigan. And so we were based in Chicago. We just thought like we can go get eyes on the product being made. The first order from Target was like 50,000 units, just bonkers. And so we just wanted to go like touch and feel and have trust in, who we were working with. And they ended up being a fantastic partner. And we never left them after we were doing hundreds of thousands of units. And then we would basically ship them to a distributor in Atlanta. This was a company that we got introduced to through Target. So again, from a negotiating standpoint, it was a dream because we had Target, their biggest customer, telling them they should work with us. And so we had every bit of leverage that you could possibly imagine. Target's like, hey, listen, we're going to be buying hundreds of thousands of units of this game. We'd like you to work with them. And so they're just like, okay. And so they had to say basically okay to anything we asked for. So that again was a highly unusual situation, but worked out well. And so that was kind of the business. I mean, we made them in Michigan, would ship them to Atlanta to where the distributor was. And then from there, basically just focused on sales and marketing.
Wow.
PR.
Yeah. Well, in that way, they're a good partner to you, right? You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
If you zoom out here a little bit, right? I mean, I think them believing in the product and in you, right, goes a long way. And the fact that they're willing to make those concessions, and obviously they are who they are. You know what I mean? That that's a lot of shelves that that product can be on. So and then they open up the doors to their distribution network and things like that. I mean, I think that's great. I mean,
it works out well because I mean, working with a company of that size, I mean, it's we would have had to hire a team, quite frankly, to manage that. I mean, the technology they use, like, is EDI compliance, again, like these terms that I didn't even know what they meant. I do now, because now we are a little more straightforward working with the retailers directly, and it's complicated stuff. So at that time, to be able to work with a distributor who knows those systems in and out and has already the team in place, we couldn't have done it otherwise, quite frankly.
So because why don't we talk a little bit about PaddleSmash, because that's a current product that you're working on. Where do people like find that? What kind of process is that? Is it a hybrid of the different models that you've worked on before? How does that work?
Yeah, so after selling both the board game company, the software company, Scott, who I've mentioned already, he had sold his retail chain to another kind of a large toy and game company called Spin Master. They're publicly traded, based in Toronto. We just enjoyed working together and always said we wanted to do something. And Scott's a big pickleball player. And so we would have just kind of brainstorming sessions and trying to think of different products that we would want to potentially team up on together. So this was probably 2020. Sometime in 2020, we had one of these brainstorming sessions, and again, like he was really into pickleball. He's like, what can we do in that space? And we were, thinking about like combining ideas, and we actually sketched up on a napkin something very similar that looks today like PaddleSmash. Well, 2 weeks later, Scott happened to get introduced to somebody. He lives out in Utah, and he got introduced to an inventor out there that had essentially created PaddleSmash, like the same thing that we had sketched up on a napkin. He had already built a prototype of and had been playtesting it for like a year with his neighbors and family and friends. So this was a little bit different. So this was, now we've got somebody that we're going to license from. So this gentleman, Joe's his name, 7 kids, 6 of them boys, used to love playing spike ball. The whole family's now in playing to pickleball. Like a lot of people, pickleball courts are always crowded. They're 20 minutes away. And he's a structural engineer by trade. And he wanted to come up with something that they could just play in the backyard. And so him being an engineer, he's like good with a CNC machine and a router. And he just kind of like cobbled together this concept, kind of combining pickleball and spike ball. Didn't know what to do with it. He's not an entrepreneur, didn't know how to bring it to market. Was introduced to Scott. Scott played it and was like, dude, like, this is so much fun. And he's like, I think this is it. So I ended up flying out there. We took it to some pickleball courts, played it with some people. Immediately, people were like, this is awesome. So we were like, all right, this is it. So we licensed. So in that situation, not the inventors. I know people are like, well, you had sketched it up. And I'm like, yeah, but what Joe did in saving us from that sketch, taking it to a prototype, I mean, he accelerated our path to market by at least a year. And he had already figured out the rules, all these kinks, all these things that just take a lot of time. So to us, it was worth it to pay for that speed to market, because what I'm describing that just happened is very common in, for sure, toys and games, but I'd say a lot of products where something is just in the ether, where a lot of ideas that look the same end up coming out at the same time. And I don't necessarily know how to explain it. It's just things with pop culture and whatever. Scott, in his prior role, was he would interview people for their different ideas and whether or not they wanted to take them in and bring them to market. He'd be at a trade show and see like 4 of the same thing, just independent inventors kind of coming up with the same product, basically. So it's just a weird phenomenon. Not really sure how to explain it. So we just felt like,
but I mean, if you think about it, though, I mean, that they're not coming immediately to my head, but like inherently, I knew exactly what you were saying.
Yeah,
whether the Reebok pumps and Nike, whatever, or
exactly. You'll see that a lot with other brands where it's like they're all kind of launching similar type products at the same time. So I don't know, there's just something to it. And so we were a little nervous also that somebody else was having this idea, and so we just said, let's license it from him, give him a royalty, and we'll take it to market. So we had to go through kind of like a year-long, not 9-month-long design phase, because what he had was like very rough prototype, and we had to make one that was going to be mass producible, lightweight, cost effective, portable, all these things that we would need in order to, bring it to market. So we did that, and then ultimately came, this is now, we're in what month are we in? May of 2023. We launched it in basically October of 22. So we did end up raising some money from that. So as I just kind of talked smack about not raising capital, we had intended to we were going to self-fund it. In doing some of our due diligence in showing this thing to different people that, we just kind of trust their business acumen, the immediate follow-up was, I love it. Can I invest? And so Scott and I were just like, listen, like this thing is going to be a little more expensive. The components and whatnot, we're talking like custom, like injection molding, massive pieces of plastic. Like these things are just expensive and a little more complicated to make. We set very favorable terms, and we were just like, listen, if we can raise at this with just like this small network that we've been talking to, then let's just do it. So we did end up doing that, raised about $500,000 at a $4 million valuation. So pre-product, pre-anything, felt pretty good about, just giving away basically 12% of the company to bring this thing to life. And sorry, should I pause? I feel like I just keep talking.
Oh,
am I even answering your questions? I'm just going off here. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm trying to give you like insider baseball and like how these things come to light and like what are the backstories. So all right, so we're going to market. We've got a product. We figured it out. Took us a little longer than we expected, but we've got something that we feel really good about. The plan was direct to consumer to start, because part of our thesis here was let's create the demand with the market before we go to retailers, because within the retail world, there's been a ton of consolidation. There's very few big retailers that are going to move the needle for you. Target, Walmart, that's kind of it on like the toys and game side. This is more in the sporting goods category. It's like Dick's and then Shields, Academy Sports, but like Dick's is like it. And when there's that type of leverage, so even though that anomaly I told you earlier of the story with Utter Nonsense and Target, like that is not the way things work. Typically it is like these retailers have all the leverage. You have, I don't know, it's just like if they're going to take it in, you just have to say yes, like bend over and say yes, like may I have another. And we just didn't want that to be the case. So we said, all right, we're going to go direct to consumer. We'll have our own Shopify website. We'll have Amazon. Let's build up demand. And then ultimately, take it to the retailers, hopefully with a bit of a story to tell. Mm-hmm. In preparing for that, we said, you know what, the retailers, like the big ones, like they're typically like 2 years out on making decisions for when they're going to bring stuff into stores. I mean, they really think that far ahead. I mean, at least like a year and a half. So we said, let's just ask those three that I just mentioned, Dick's, Shields, and Academy. Let's just try to get in front of them and see if maybe a year from now they'd consider us. So this is basically September of last year. We don't know anybody in that world. This is not like, in the toy and game world, we could have reached out to the buyer, Target, whatever. Didn't know anybody at Dick's, didn't know anybody at Shields. Old school cold calling, cold emailing, LinkedIn, in messaging, trying to find, buyer at Dick's. And they're somewhat hidden in terms of they're not trying to they don't want to get hit up all the time. So it's not super obvious who they are. Got back to us. Dick's was like, we want it now. We want it for this Christmas. So in 2 months. And we were like, what? So it's like, here we go again. So there's like these parallels of what I'm seeing with this company and with that original board game. What I'm not mentioning is I've had a couple other things that haven't gone this well. Okay. So you're kind of getting you're getting the highlight reel here. Okay. Shields, same thing. And so it was like, we were blown away. They both took it in immediately, granted, like not full store. So typically if a major chain like that, they're going to do test stores to start. And that's what they did. So we're currently with, Dick's, Shields in test capacities. Academy will bring it in next spring. Meanwhile, we've still gone direct to consumer with Shopify and Amazon. And I don't know. I mean,
this might be, part of the deal or whatever, but people would buy this at Target or Walmart or whatever.
It's tough because this price point. So the game sells for $199 retail. That's a bit north for certainly Walmart. I think we'd have to come out with some kind of watered down version or like some tabletop version, maybe something we've played around with. But the current one as we have it, I think is a bit rich for certainly Walmart. Target, maybe. Target, a little higher end clientele there. I think maybe our goal is, if we can get into Target, we may be able to get at a scale that we could probably bring the price down to something a little more palatable too. It's just that the volumes we're doing, we're just not, doesn't make sense. And like the unit economics are just not there right now.
Got it.
So,
and
yeah.
you're on this crazy journey, quick turnaround. We want it yesterday. And then, I can't remember when it was, but it was weeks or a month or 2 months, how time goes by. I saw your clip. You guys are on the Today Show. Like, how does that happen? Like what?
Yeah. So prior to launch, there's a woman that we've known of that has created a nice little brand for herself, where she's kind of like the cool new toys and games. That's kind of her niche. And she goes on to these talk shows and talks about what's coming out that's new and cool and up and coming. So I don't know her, but I just kind of blind emailed her and said, hey, we're launching this new game. It's kind of a cross between pickleball and spike ball. Those are two kind of popular terms right now. So that has aided in our ability to kind of catch on quickly, especially with like the retailers that I'd mentioned. Like spike ball is probably the most popular backyard game for the past 10 years. Pickleball's the fastest growing sport in America. It's exploding right now. So when we say we're a cross between those two, like it's going to get their attention, and this was the case with her too. And she gave me a reply like 2 weeks later of like, that's a cute idea. Like, I'll keep you in mind. And I was like, okay, I'll never hear from you again. But after the holidays and after we got into Dicks and Shields, again, like I've just got a little bit more of a story to tell. Like we did well through the holidays. We're in major retailers. It was like March, and it was just getting into, this is a seasonal item. It's an outdoor game. So we were kind of ramping up what we were going to want to do for the spring, summer season. And I just pinged her again. I was like, hey, just want to let you know, like, here's kind of what's going on. And, if you're doing anything, we'd love to be considered. Applied with me immediately. She's like, great timing. I'm going on the Today Show next week. Can you get me one sent out to New York like tomorrow? And I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. This is crazy. This is crazy. And so she did. She took it on the Today Show, and it was a nice bump. I mean, being on a national show like that was the first time that's happened with me. Like that's a big deal. So, and it adds credibility, right? Like it's a logo. We can put it on the website. It's now when we reach out to other retailers, other publications, being as seen on Today's Show, like that just adds a lot of credibility and just helps that conversation a little bit easier.
For sure. All right. You mentioned your successes, and then, everything hasn't gone, completely to plan, so to speak, right? With everything that you've done.
Yeah.
And my third point was just about this idea of entering the retail market, right? Because just, everybody knows somebody that's created something at some point in time, right? And they're like, I've got this idea, right? And if I could just, get it into the hands of somebody at Walmart or Target or whatever big box retail you can think of, this thing's going to take off and my life is going to be great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, I like you said, you can look at the wins and be like, oh, well, that was fortunate and easy. And it's not easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy getting in the door, but then it's also not easy on the execution side of it, right? So like things that come to my mind are, do you have the right story? Do you got to have the right product? Do you have the right pricing? Even the packaging, right? You know what I mean? Is it visually appealing? Something that somebody wants to buy? All the operational side, manufacturing, distribution, just logistical things in general. I mean, like if somebody had an idea, right? And they were to say, what does it really take? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you're going to answer this, so I'm curious, but what would you tell them? You're sitting around at a cocktail party and somebody's like, hey, I've got this thing. Like what words of advice would you have?
So there's kind of two paths you can take. I mentioned this guy, Joe, who now has a royalty with us. It's like, what do you want to do? I have other business partner that is again an inventor, and he wanted to get into more of like the publishing side of things. He realized pretty quickly, like that's not for him. He just wants to be tinkering, coming up with ideas, doesn't want to deal with all that execution you just talked about. Manufacturing, distribution, sales, marketing, like finances, like everything like that. Like there's just a lot to bring something from an idea to being on store shelves. That's not for everybody. So I'd say one is asking yourself like, okay, like, am I ready for that journey? Or do I just want to like maybe collect a check and sit back and it's mailbox money? Now your upside is greatly impacted, or like you don't have nearly the upside, I'll say, but you don't have nearly the risk. And so, you know, in our mentor's case, in my buddy Brady's case, like he's decided like, that's just what they want to do. If you want to take on everything that I'm describing, yeah, just know that, there is a lot to it. And something like, for me, it was like an ignorance is bliss type of a thing. Cause I think if I, in a way, knew then what I know now, like maybe I wouldn't have done it. But then doing it, obviously you get, builds credibility with yourself, confidence with yourself that you can execute. And so now for me, that's just what I enjoy doing. And I like that challenge. But there are a lot of pieces to it. And so if, you know, if you have that idea, one of the first things that, so I do have these conversations a lot where somebody's like, hey, like I've got a buddy that's got an idea, like, could you talk to him? And I always say yes to those, by the way, just because like, you never know, like you may be sitting on the next whatever. And I just would want to take a look at it basically. So if anybody's out there that has an idea, you know, happy to have a conversation with you. Lost my train of thought there. Okay. So the first thing is, all right, the mom test. Your mom is going to say she loves everything you do. Don't show your mom it. Okay. Show it to people that are going to give you that raw, like unfiltered feedback of whether your product is shit or not, because everyone like kind of loves their own baby also. And you need to get that just like, all right, I want to know if this thing's real, but if I ask this to you, you're like, this guy's a buddy. Like, do I really want to tell him his idea sucks? You know? So you either have to have those friends that will be honest with you, or try to find someone outside your network that you can be like bouncing your idea off of, to get just like, is this anything, you know? And if you get enough people being like, that's really interesting, then I would say next steps were to be like, to make a prototype. So just before you like ever spend any money though, really like beat up your idea to figure out if there's something there. And then create as rough of a prototype as you possibly can. And be like, okay, was my idea in my head, is it actually working out the way I thought it would, when I'm now using it or playing with it or whatever. And if you keep getting yeses along this whole way, then you just kind of keep down that path. Then it's like, all right, do I have the ability to fund this myself? Yes or no? Then you may need to go raise some capital. You need to find manufacturing. Then there's the branding side. What am I going to call this thing? You know, all that. And so you just, you know, don't start out thinking you're going to like get to the finish line, but just like keep getting those early yeses and those early validations and keep plugging along. And then the beauty of right now is that you can control your own destiny with these direct to consumer channels, with spinning up your own website, selling it on Amazon. I mean, that's really the modern day form of getting into big retailers, particularly on Amazon, because that's what buyers are quite frankly doing. They're now looking, it's like a breeding ground for new ideas for these buyers. They're looking at what's trending on Amazon. They're looking at reviews. You know, old school was like, you'd get into maybe like the mom pop, you know, onesie twosie stores, get like a couple of years of sales track record. From there, you could go to a big retailer and kind of share your story of success with them. Now with Amazon and with, you know, Shopify, like, you know, in a year, you can have like pretty strong evidence to take to them to say like, listen, like, I think this thing could perform well on your shelves. So you want to have that story to tell though, is my opinion. And like, unless you have, or like with Kickstarter, excuse me too, like, you know, if you've got something that's done really well on Kickstarter that buyers can see that, yeah, like this thing blew up, like it's going to give them the confidence that it would sell on their shelves. So I don't know if that answer your question in terms of kind of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I would imagine, is it the case that they complement one another? Like, meaning if you, let's say you started on Amazon and then something got picked up in retail, right? I would imagine that people have eyeballs on it now. They've seen the product, as opposed to like when you go on Amazon, if you're not looking for it, right? You don't see it. So like, I
Yeah.
would imagine that they kind of complement one another, I guess, in a way, would be what I would think.
I firmly believe that, because yeah, it's just like these touch points these days. I mean, it used to be 7, now it's probably 30 times somebody needs to see something before they're making a buying decision. So like they've seen it on Amazon, they've seen it on social media, they saw it at that one store. And I definitely believe that. So like when we have these like exclusivity calls with like for instance, like a Target, I disagree that that's gonna, I think it'll be more beneficial to have it on Amazon and not exclusive to Target is my point there. I just think where it's more available to people, like it's just, then it seems like it's everywhere. Something I'll say that's also like interesting with games that I've learned is that there's like an inherent viral coefficient with games, because you're always playing them with other people. So if you're bringing, you're typically like, if one person finds it, they bring it to a party, they're introducing it to 5 or 10 other people. Well, there's like it's like a built-in word of mouth marketing, and it's hard to get to there, but like once something really gets going, it's word of mouth marketing that is ultimately going to be like the biggest driver of success, particularly within toys and games.
Super interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, this has been all that and then some in terms of what I could have hoped for. I mean,
dude, I don't know. I feel like I just like talked your ear off and didn't answer any of your questions.
I think it's perfect.
Hopefully there's some nuggets in there that somebody finds valuable. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%, no doubt in my mind. It's been, I mean, awesome. And I've loved, like I said, I mean, I've just been sort of witnessing it from an arm's length. So it's just cool to unpack it. I'm sure you've told, a lot of these stories many times, but I love, just kind of digging in and hearing them. So that's awesome.
Thank you. Really appreciate
it. You do have 3 more questions though.
Okay. Rapid fire.
Favorite podcast besides this one that you listen to?
Yeah, besides this one, I will say like I'm an OG Tim Ferriss fan. I mean, if you kind of look at my lifestyle and the life that I've built, it's hard for me not to like look at what he's preached from kind of the early 40-hour work week book, and building these kind of like single person businesses that you can run from anywhere, right? Like there's just a lot of synergies with things that he talks about and that he's done, that I really do enjoy the Tim Ferriss podcast, and still listen to it quite religiously.
Very good. That's a good one. Best concert you've ever been to?
It seems prescient these days because it's so in the news, but Taylor Swift. And so I want to say it was probably like 6 years ago, living downtown Chicago with my fiance then, or whatever, my now wife, my girlfriend at the time. And we're living in like Fulton Market area. Taylor Swift was playing at Soldiers Field. It was probably like July. It was one of these just like perfect Chicago summer nights. We rode our bikes from West Loop over to Soldier Field, along the lake, through downtown. The concert was amazing. Taylor's just like, whatever, deserves every bit of credit that she gets. Amazing performer. I think got like some Italian lemonade on the way home. It's just the whole experience made it. The concert was unbelievable, but I think the whole just kind of like, I don't know, riding our bikes in this like perfect Chicago night downtown, like just saw Taylor Swift. That one sticks out to me as a great one.
Yeah. People that have gone, I think my wife may have gone with the oldest of our kids. And I remember her just even, as an adult as well, or whatever, she was just like, it was amazing. I think they had the wristbands and stuff like that were coordinated. I think like Coldplay does a similar thing, but
right. They like light up and stuff. Yeah.
But like you said, just a great performer. And what you also said was, she deserves every bit of credit that comes to her. She's
unbelievable.
Thanks for her career. Okay. Last question is a place that you've been that everybody should visit once.
Japan.
Okay.
So
We've got a couple of votes for Japan, by the way, on the.
is that
on the-
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the coolest place I've ever been to. I mentioned after we sold the software company, ended up going like a 6-month walkabout is what I learned the term was while I was on it. Kind of Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, and spent 2 weeks in Japan. Like life-changing. I don't know. I just like was the coolest place I've ever been. Kind of felt like kindred spirits, like maybe in another life I was Japanese, like just something about it there. It's just hard to explain, like the culture, the food, the people, the atmosphere, the topography, both Tokyo, but then also getting out into the mountains. And it's just a stunning place. And it feels like everywhere has become so westernized, and so Americanized everywhere you go, and there's Starbucks everywhere. And granted, they have those in Japan, but Japan just felt like this is different. Like there's like, this is I don't know, maybe because it's an island and they're maybe we're isolated for a long time or something. And like, it just feels like they are such a unique culture that they've maintained there. And it just is so like a breath of fresh air to go somewhere that just doesn't feel at all familiar. It just feels like so wholly unique of everything that they have going on there, and just absolutely love Japan.
Very cool. I love it.
Yeah.
I appreciate all your time. Like I said, it's been great to catch up, cheering you on. Can't wait to get the game and play a little bit. Got a little trip to the lake this weekend, so maybe I'll
Cool.
hop in the store and bring something fresh and fun to the lake this weekend. But really enjoyed just catching up, and appreciate your time. I think people are going to love tuning in.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
You bet.